Welcome back to our What's Next for Impact series. Today, we're going to cover strong community engagement. And we're here as usual with Meg Starr, our global head of impact here at Carlyle. Meg, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to flip the script on you this time. In all of the other installments of What's Next for Impact, you've interviewed others here at Carlyle. Today, I'm going to interview you and put you on the hot seat. So I'm really excited, and I know our investors, our management teams, and others are excited to hear because you're the expert in this area.
Excited to try.
So let's start with why. Why should building and supporting strong communities be top of mind for business leaders in 2022?
I think to get to where we are today, it's helpful to wind the tape back a little bit to where we came from, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions that go along with this idea of supporting communities and strong communities as it relates to business. And we'll start with the deeply tactical. I think in the early days of this field, we sometimes use the term corporate social responsibility, or CSR. And it really referred to activities that were more akin to volunteering in communities or philanthropy. And they tended to be pretty disconnected from the core business and from the concept of how do you drive profitability. That field has morphed in a lot of ways into the more strategic field of ESG. How do you actually integrate environmental and social and governance considerations in a way that really drives value for your business? And I think at the same time, our conception of what communities mean has also morphed. CSR used to focus on the deeply tactical of the physical community in which your employees or your actual property, plant, and equipment were located. And we actually have a much different version of what community means now. We actually mean communities to be your physical community, but it's also communities of employees, communities of NGOs that care about your industry or sector, communities of key stakeholders. And so this idea of strong communities has really morphed from being about kind of physical volunteering, philanthropy, into this idea of really how do you think more holistically about the stakeholders that are core to your business, and how do you form strong strategic relationships with them in a symbiotic way that can drive business value?
So Meg, if the definition of communities has changed over time, has the types of data that business leaders should be looking at to see if they are engaging with their communities and whether that is leading to better business outcomes, has that data changed? Can you help us understand what types of data business leaders should look at when it comes to engaging with their communities?
Sure. And to get to the data, I think it's important to think about what the different pillars are of how you can actually use community engagement as a business priority. There are kind of three main categories here that I think are helpful to touch on. I think the first is how do you use community engagement as a way of preserving and enhancing your license to operate? This is really about risk management. It's particularly true for companies that have, large physical footprints, manufacturing, infrastructure, et cetera. But it's really important for all companies of how do you maintain that license to operate by thinking about how you're being very careful and very safe around pollutants or how you're using land space. We see this a lot when we're building infrastructure assets. Even if it's something like renewable energy, you have to be really thoughtful about habitat issues or land use concerns and how you're engaging with that local community so that the investments work for everyone. So I'd say number one is risk mitigation and license to operate. Number two is really around value creation. And a big value from community engagement is around how that impacts your employees. Having a comprehensive community engagement program can help you find new employees. It can help you retain and engage your top employees. Because what we're seeing is in this rapidly changing world and in a very tight labor market, employees are really looking to work at a company that aligns with their values and offers them opportunities to engage with communities they're part of. In this age of what they're calling the Great Resignation, this is a more important tool than ever. And we've seen this across studies about employee morale, about employee retention, about employee loyalty. There was a survey by Mercer recently on global talent trends. And 75% of employees that were classified as thriving, aka doing really well at work, engaged, productive, et cetera, 75% of thriving employees say that they work for a company with a strong sense of purpose. That's almost double the number of employees who don't feel like they're thriving. And so we see this as really important for how you motivate, retain, and engage those employees. And then the last is another value creation lever. It's around brand awareness, brand value, and customer loyalty. And I think to put it simply, if people in the community don't know about your business, they're a lot less likely to buy your products and services. So when a company is vocal, involved in their communities, they can build that brand awareness, reputation enhancement. And in the process, it's really important to create customer loyalty. And so I think being present in the community is another way to make a brand a household name, to build goodwill, to build that kind of positive flywheel of word of mouth recommendation. And this is really critical for customer trust. Dedicating meaningful time and resources to give back to the communities a company engages with can really clearly position the company as an organization that prioritizes its values and is one that you can trust. So back to your initial question of data, I think you really have to focus on what is the lever that you're prioritizing and what data can you use to actually measure and understand and drive progress there.
So Meg, I'm going to bring in a quote from my therapist. Actually, I promise you it's relevant. She often tells me that the view on the present determines the paths you take in the future. And I bring that up because I think it would be really helpful for investors and management teams to hear whether you see companies starting on different paths to engaging their communities in the future. If you were to kind of categorize the paths that companies are taking from the ones you've been working with over the last year or two, could you explain the different paths, and are there different ones?
Definitely. I would say that the successful approaches we see tend to be really specific to the company and localized by geography. What actually matters to the communities that you're a part of, and how can you focus on those in a meaningful way? So I give a couple of examples on that. For example, we have some companies whose core business might be doing something like digital marketing. And so one focus area of their community engagement could be doing pro bono digital marketing for a nonprofit of employees' choice. So there's a lot of focus on how do we use our core skill sets, maybe your consultants, maybe your engineers, maybe your manufacturers. How do you use those core skill sets and dedicate some portion of employee time towards really driving positive benefit through an NGO, through an external partner with that? Another approach is to really focus on what's regionally important. We have one portfolio company that's located in the north of the United Kingdom. And historically, a lot of focus is around London and the major cities. But this company is really focused on how they can break from the pack and be an innovative company in manufacturing regions who haven't gotten the same level of attention or investment. And so they're really trying to champion local tech talent, stimulating local economies in a region that's traditionally underrepresented. And so they're working to build out a kind of distinct voice around a region that doesn't always get the same attention. We have another portfolio company that operates a lot of restaurants in South America, and they focus on employee housing because it's critical for their employees that they have good housing and housing that's located relatively close to their jobs so that they don't have very long commutes. That company's actually furnished thousands of employee housing opportunities across their employee base, which is really driven by this objective of how do we invest in local communities and really change the reality of the experience of our employees. So I would say in general, what we're seeing in terms of the different paths is how do you orient towards what really takes advantage of a company's distinct position, distinct skill set, distinct issues that it's facing, and be strategic in targeting that versus trying to solve a bunch of things in uncoordinated fashion, or focusing on things that just aren't super relevant to the employees or the communities that the company is positioned in.
Great. So we've covered the past of community engagement, starting with the history of corporate social responsibility. Then you took us through the present of really defining a strategic way of engaging with a broader set of a community than we've previously done. Let's end on your outlook for the future. When we sit down a year from now and look back at the ways that companies have engaged in the communities, What do you think we're going to be talking about a year from now?
So I think three things here. I think the first is it's really important that employees' voices are heard in developing how you approach community engagement. And so we've been seeing a lot more companies dedicate a group of employee ambassadors to really build out that program. It gives those ambassadors a more hands-on role in the program development. It really deepens their engagement, can be a really great stretch opportunity. But it also helps leaders have that ear on the ground to actually understand what's exciting and what's engaging and what is motivating for their employees. I think second is that we have this new normal of hybrid or remote working in many companies. And so there's also a focus of how do you do community engagement in a hybrid environment? We've seen things like virtual volunteering, which can be easier to scale, volunteering, doing tutoring with local students, for example. It might actually be less time intensive and easier if you don't have to commute. It can also be challenging because you don't have the same level of gratification as a hands-on experience. So I think we're seeing a lot of innovations around kind of hybrid work and hybrid community engagement. And then I think finally, we see that companies that are doing this really successfully are in dialogue and in lockstep with their local communities. And so are really listening and learning and being responsive to specific needs. And we think that's where the discussion on community engagement is headed. Not kind of parachuting in and saying, here's what we think you could use, but really having that two-way dialogue of where we as a company can show up and be most impactful in a local community, because that's where you'll get the most bang for your buck in terms of actual impact, in terms of actual employee engagement, and in terms of long-term sustainable value creation for all the communities that you're a part of.
Well, Meg, thank you for so concisely giving us this overview of community engagement and how it's part of the value creation with many different industries and different companies. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.